Hi there, guys. I wanted to do a little bit of a follow-up to my coronavirus Wuhan prediction. As you know, I likened it to the outbreak of bubonic plague in Moscow and St. Petersburg last time. There was a Jupiter-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, and therefore I felt it would be pretty much contained in China. Now, I know a lot of you doubt me on this, so let's just wait and see. I did have one comment from someone who said I sounded absolutely far too cheerful and smiley for all that death. Well, I'm sorry about that. I must admit, I watched the stream over and I was in an extremely exuberant mood. Um, yeah, I obviously was feeling very cheerful about something. I'm not quite sure why. There was no particular reason. So I've been following the story. So it seems to me that at the moment, the diagnoses are proportional to the amount of diagnostic kits available rather than the amount of people that are getting it. And I feel that's very much the case around the world as well. That's probably why we're seeing no cases in places like Africa and developing countries in South America. And I feel there are limited cases in America. I believe there are far more cases, particularly in the Seattle, Washington area. Now, I was listening to a call-in show on Alex Jones, and a lady phoned in who is a nurse in New York, and she said they were seeing quite a lot of cases of viral pneumonia, and they were diagnosing it as that because they didn't have testing kits, therefore they weren't quite sure, but they were taking precautions. So you wonder how widespread that is. Hi there. Hi, Renegade Master. Good name. And then I was thinking about this hospital, the two hospitals, one with 1,000 beds and one with 1,500 beds that they've built in Wuhan, supposedly. I was reading an article yesterday in the New York Times, and it was quite a good article for the NYT, fake news specialists they are, but they were talking about masses of beds in places like stadiums. They were talking about the Chinese government using conference centers to have many beds. They were saying that these beds were just lined up in scenes that actually looked like the Spanish flu. And the article went on and on and on. And I was waiting for them to talk about these two hospitals. They were never mentioned. So I'm just wondering what's happening there. And then I thought to myself, they're not really hospitals, are they? They're almost like quarantine camps. It's just prefabs with beds. Because if you think about it, they said they needed 7,000 tradespeople. So those are all your plumbers, electricians, carpenters, fitters, joiners, whatever they needed, site managers, in order to construct one of these hospitals. So how do you get 7,000 tradespeople into an area effectively on lockdown? Where was their accommodation? How were they fed during this time? It's quite a lot of people to bring into an area that's kind of sensitive and locked down. I also wonder where the staff, how they're going to staff these hospitals, because Wuhan's hospitals are already at full capacity. All their doctors and nurses are being utilized. So they're going to have to bring in doctors and nurses from other parts of the country. Where are they going to stay in a place that's in lockdown? Unless they're going to find a building and sanitize it, and they're all going to stay there. I was also thinking that although they showed pictures of this hospital being built and whatnot and looked very impressive, I mean, we've all seen pictures. I've seen Star Wars, but that wasn't really happening in real life either. So I'm wondering if there's a little bit of theatre world going on with the building of these hospitals. Because what about all the medical supplies needed? Were they able to be sourced within 7 to 10 days, or were they brought in from other hospitals? So now other hospitals are maybe lacking some equipment. How is it possible to generate all the materials so quickly, all the resources for it? It seems even for China, I know it's a command economy, it's a communist state, they can do these big projects. It still seemed a little bit unbelievable. Plus, was there time to lay the sufficient plumbing, all the electrics for these hospitals? And and as I say, you've also got to have a wing for the catering. You have to bring in people to deal with all the food and the catering for the patients, all the cleaning staff. There's a huge amount that goes to running a hospital. All those people have to live somewhere or have to be bussed in, and it's an exclusion zone. So how is that all working? And I wondered if that's really the case at all. I see the UK and the EU fighting over fishing access. Yeah, well, exactly. I hope they're going to go hard on that. I saw in the picture of the paper, there's one Dutch ship catches like a quarter of the fishing quotas that we have. So it just shows you, it's always been very unfair, the fishing with the EU. So just back to Wuhan, I'm wondering, like I say, I feel sure that China's underreporting. Communist regime would, because otherwise it creates mass panic. It might undermine their authority. It might cause a crisis that could lead to the downfall even of the government. They're already saying on Time magazine that this puts the Chinese century, which is what they were aiming for, of course, they're going to be the superpower this century, they thought, in jeopardy. Of course, we're waiting to see. It's far too early to tell whether it's really going to catch on in the rest of the world. At the moment, it's certainly centered around China. Huge amount of cases in Singapore, but that just could be because they have good medical system there, good testing, and lots of testing kits. Seems rather low in the UK. Do you remember they were telling us that airlines like BA, Virgin, and what were no longer flying from China? Well, this is incorrect. If you go on Heathrow arrivals on the website and you check, you will find that a BA flight comes in from Shanghai and Beijing every day, along with the Air China flight and a Virgin flight. There are also flights from South China Air from Guangzhou and East China Air from Shanghai and Guangzhou? Sorry about my pronunciation. I've lost the plot on that particular city name. But there certainly has been no limitation of travel. All the airlines that stop travel have started it again. So either if they're doing that for commercial purposes or they've done a risk evaluation and decided it's not a problem, make of it as you will. The only country in Europe putting kind of restrictions on at the moment is Italy. And if you include Russia, yes, Russia's putting on restrictions. Other countries like Mongolia, or I believe America, are starting to, Japan and the Philippines, but at the moment, Europe are being very laissez-faire. I think in this country, they should be a bit more worried because with the NHS as it is, it can't take even a small outbreak. But at the moment, they don't seem particularly concerned about it. So I just wanted to do a little follow-up on that. I thought those were some interesting points to mention. I talked about me listening to the Alex Jones phone, and it's quite interesting to hear individual people on their experiences call in, and I don't believe that you're really getting that anywhere else on a phone-in. And someone phoned in and he said there was an emergency kind of convention booked to recruit specialized drivers for liquid oxygen and liquid carbon dioxide. And this particular caller thought that might be significant in terms of maybe a medical emergency. Why do they suddenly need all these specialized drivers that can drive the liquid oxygen and liquid carbon dioxide? I have no idea if that's at all relevant, but I'll put it out there. Maybe one of you guys has got a comment. I also wanted to talk about the decline of the British High Street with reference to an article about John Lewis, who are having a particularly difficult time. As you know, with all the department stores, they're really struggling. But John Lewis has a huge amount of floor space kind of devoted to soft furnishings, things people aren't really buying anymore, including things like ornaments, glassware, dinner services, and a lot of their furniture is really for people who have very big houses. You wouldn't even get it into one of these tiny apartments that they're now building. So a lot of their floor space is kind of for white elephant departments. But they have a new chairman, a lady, and she's been recruited from the civil service. She was with the Treasury. She has no experience in retail, which I find very odd. You've got a store that's failing, that's facing the biggest crisis in its history, that's not making enough profits to kind of sustain it, to grow, to refurbish stores or to modernize. It's in real difficulty. And they employ someone who is not from retail and no experience in retail. And I just wanted to read you. This hit the floor while I wanted to read you the article to see what she says, because I think this is a case of John Lewis is going to get woke and go broke. So we will watch this. In the speech delivered by, let's see, the lady is Sharon White, I think is her name. White, 52, said John Lewis is the business for our times. She added, we should be owning the ethical and environmental agenda. I think in 2020, the partnership values are more important than ever. More than 10 years since the financial crisis, as a country, we're still asking, is business doing its role to create a good society, good jobs, and decent pay? She said there's no silver bullet, but she said the firm can survive by what she says doubling down on an ethical business model and that puts people before profit. Oh my God, I see problems with this. People before profit in an ethical business model. It's kind of this woke language, which I can see she comes from the civil service because they're absolutely immersed in this kind of language. But surely the best way to create value for your staff is to run a business that stays in business. You've got to keep, I noticed there's nothing about the customer, producing what the customer wants, creating a good customer experience. Without that, there's no money coming in. Therefore, you can't maintain, you can't retain staff. I think she's got the totally wrong end of the stick. This is definitely get woke, go broke. All this environmental, they're worrying about environmental, about ethical, about a good experience for the staff. What about your bottom line? What about just staying in business, getting people through the door so that you can make profit? I think this is the whole problem when capitalism starts to get woke. Traditional capitalism should be about objective results and objective indicators, like your bottom line, your profit, your growth. You're keeping your costs down and therefore being more efficient. As soon as you start running a business on subjective criteria like perceived value to the staff, or how good you're being to the community, or creating a better world, or being more environmental, or being more ethical, these are airy-fairy notions that you can't quantify. Therefore, as soon as you run a business according to these subjective, unobjective, often unquantifiable measures, things begin to go downhill because you're forgetting your core purpose, which is to produce a product that customers want, so they come through the door, and therefore you grow, you make profit, and you can pay your staff. If you start worrying about all these other things and forgetting your customer, you cannot go broke. So I'm not quite sure why they've chosen this lady of everyone who has no experience and who is talking in these terms that I don't feel has a hope of turning around John Lewis or any department store in these difficult times. She doesn't seem to have a grasp or put any value in the customer. The customer seems totally a non-entity as far as she's concerned. I think as soon as you get totally worried about environmental, your costs are going to go up. You're not necessarily creating value. John Lewis was never knowingly undersold. That was their tagline. You know, they were a store that offered value, good service, but now they just worried about, better community, better to society. How would you measure that? This is why communism fails, is because they become obsessed with very subjective measures that are really in the eye of the beholder, and which have no, fundamental basis for measuring. It just is all down to a matter of opinion, all down to someone's feelings. And it's much better to be looking at your profit and loss. Are we selling stuff? And if we're not selling stuff, gosh, we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem. So I just thought I'd mention that. Hi, Jonathan. Hi, I love your jump. I can't wait to watch your Ireland predictions. When I've seen your Spanish prediction, I see similarities with Ireland. Oh my God, I mentioned that. I did. I mentioned similarities. And I said, who knows, maybe Fianna Fáil is also going to form an alliance with Sinn Féin, despite everything they've said, just like Sanchez is now going to have an alliance with Podemos. Could happen. Ireland's sort of shifting exactly like Spain, more and more to the left, getting more and more antagonistic to the EU. Leo's out. Yeah, Leo definitely out. I also see a possible recession happening in Australia, but they'll bounce back. I can't see it having a lasting impact. A trade deal between the UK and Australia will happen. Yes, well, Australia is a great ally. There'll definitely be a trade deal, but I can see, of course, the recession is going to be everywhere. But I think the Southern Hemisphere countries may buck the trend. So thanks, guys. Lovely to chat to you all on a Friday night. Have a wonderful weekend, hey? Ciao.